Stephen Greenleaf, you wanted to jump in?
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember in university ages ago hearing data on how if you take measures while you're operating a quarry to prepare for its decommissioning, the cost is compared to if you do nothing, abandon the quarry, and then the government has to come in and remediate the quarry after the fact. The cost for abandonment and cleanup after the fact was 300 times as expensive as if you took some basic measures while the quarry was operating. Now, quarries are not just regulated by the EMA Act. There also is a quarry license procedure through the Ministry of Energy and Energy Affairs, and I think there's discussion inside there about changing those rules. But this is an international problem, really. I mean, for example, a U.S. senator just went on the record recently as saying, in terms of why the U.S. has never ratified any real goals for reduction in climate change. And he said, look, I'm in a coal state, and if I vote against emissions, I'll be out of Senate in the next election. So quarrying has a lot of lobbying power, obviously. And I think it's important to note, all quarrying operators are not created equal. But what Kyle's saying, I think gets to the heart of every environmental issue in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is a lack of enforcement. We have the carrot, but we don't have the stick, not adequately. There's no punishment for ill behavior in this case. And what that means is that the best operators, whether it's in the manufacturing sector, energy sector, quarrying sector, they're trying to comply with rules, or maybe they have their own corporate social responsibility, and they're trying to be good citizens environmentally and in other ways. But their competitors are getting a major competitive advantage because they're not even attempting to abide by the rules. So what we do is it's a double-edged sword here. We're also economically penalizing the best operators who are trying to do their jobs correctly at the expense of handing over natural resources that are the public property to a bunch of people who are going to abandon their quarries and walk away and leave us with the problem, and our grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren with the problem.
LIMA.
Part of the problem is also the fact that there are good people working in government offices in forestry. I work with many people from inside of forestry in our capacity as them allowing us to go along with them and see what they're doing. And I see there are people out there that are trying, but they get frustrated by being let down in the process later down the line. What I've seen is that what is happening. For example, I was told of an incident in which a man was caught harvesting apamat wood in the Mayaro forests. He had a plank saw in the forest, which apparently they no longer license. I was told they no longer license these saws. It was seized by the SWORD services, who was working along with the Defense Force services, who were working along with forestry on a roadblock operation. They seized the equipment. They seized the planks. A phone call was made by the man who was harvesting the wood to, I don't want to mention anybody's name, somebody in the Conservancy, who told the police and the forestry official to let him go. So there is big gaps in accountability. And also another example, and a slightly different topic, but it illustrates the point. Another forestry official told me he came across somebody with an illegal animal in his possession. They arrested the man, they charged him, they took him to court, they went through the whole process. It was like a murder trial, and of course when they got to court, the judge let him go with a warning. Right, so the judiciary are also letting down the team at the same time, because they're not enforcing. These people are being given a slap on the wrist, and they feel like, okay, well, I could go back and do it.
Mm-hmm. That helps us segue very nicely into some other issues, particularly issues involving national security and illegal activity, and how our forests are being exploited in that regard. But just to remind everyone, this is Talk City 91.1 FM, and you're listening to a very special panel discussion putting our forests in the spotlight. It's part of our observance here at Talk City of World Environment Day. And the theme this year for World Environment Day is Forests, Nature at Your Service. Just in case you got a bit confused when we were doing all that discussion about quarrying here in Trinidad and Tobago, well, it's simply this. Forests are being destroyed so that people can quarry and they are abusing the lands that they're quarrying on and destroying the forests. So that's where the quarrying discussion fit into this entire discussion on forests as part of our observance of World Environment Day. Now, Kyle de Lima, you just pointed to some illegal activity there. That is also another bugbear that poor Mr. Singh and his team at Forestry Division have to deal with. You're talking about poaching of wildlife. You also talked about illegal logging. Let's look at that. How bad is that situation? Mr. Singh?
The reports indicate that there is a fair amount of these illegal activities taking place. We are governed by certain pieces of legislation, the Forest Act, for example, which governs how we treat with our forests, and therefore removing any item or resource from the forest. Quite simply, it is against the law to remove any piece of a tree, be it a lumber or part of a tree, be it even produced, maybe even balata fruits, for example, from any such tree growing on state-owned forests without a permit issued by the Forestry Division. A lot of people seem not to be aware of that. Nevertheless, a lot of people help themselves to state-owned forest produce, especially in terms of the logging. And we heard the example of the sort of hot milling, the on-the-spot milling, where you convert a tree right at its stump there to planks and boards, which can be readily removed. And we do not license that type of equipment, all right? We never did, all right? And we still continue to refuse to grant any license for that type of equipment. The only sawmills that are licensed is the ones that are fixed, the ones that officers can visit from time to time and inspect those operations. One of the major problems that we have in terms of a governance arrangement is our terms and conditions of service. We are normal public servants. We work Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. And therefore, that leaves the rest of the days and the weekends and so on almost with our forests unprotected. All right? We have a small cadre of game wardens, all right, who have a more flexible working arrangement, and they are out there on weekends and public holidays outside of normal working hours and so on. But remember, we have 17 such persons to secure the forest resources then on weekends and so on for the island of Trinidad. And therefore you cannot have the eyes and ears in all of these forested areas. We do appreciate and we do need the assistance of the public in helping us report these incidents. But given the sort of climate that we're in terms of people scared for their own well-being by submitting these reports, we understand that people are very reluctant to come forward.
That, Mr. Singh. Right. Trini Eco Warriors is not afraid to do that. And we what I would like to try and highlight a little bit is that the process for even us to try and get that story or that issue dealt with is lacking in continuity. So when we come to find somebody in the forest, for example, we all know animals live in the forest. We were coming out of the forest one day in Brazos Seco and came across a hunter in possession of a powie, right? A live powie that he had shot, right? It is a critically endangered animal. There are less than 200 of them left, estimated by UE. And it's only from Trinidad and Tobago. We were able to seize the bird from him with the assistance of the Blanchisseuse police force, police station. But after that, there has been no sort of, no sort of repercussion on the part of the hunter. For nobody has gone to even talk to him about what he did. Nobody has said, okay, this is a fine. Even so, the fines that are in place now in Trinidad and Tobago are pathetic. Yes. If you get caught with a powie in your possession, the fine is $200, right? The bird itself is probably worth $10,000, just to call it a number, right? Fines in Trinidad and Tobago need to be re-established, re-evaluated. I think that fines should be $10,000 an animal. Because if you get caught once with an animal and you get fined $10,000, believe me, you're not going to get caught with an animal again. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying these are gaps that have become apparent over the years. That the Forestry Act and along with other acts in Trinidad were written in the early part of the 19th century and the 20th century, and they need to be updated.
So we have the challenges of illegal logging. We have the challenges of poaching the forest animals to supply that exotic animals market. And there is also another issue, if my memory serves me right, of the forests being used to grow illegal drugs.
Of course. I want to point out something, though, that, I get told all the time, Trinis don't care about the environment. And I don't believe that. I think increasingly that is not true. And it's how you talk about it, and it's if you really go and dig a little bit and ask people, well, how do you feel about this or that? You find out that there's a little more interest and desire in preservation than you might think. But then, of course, there's a frustration of, okay, what do we do about it? What if you work in the forestry division and you wish you could issue a $10,000 fine, but you can't? So what can we all do about this? Well, I believe it is time to put lobbying pressure on the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago right now, because budget time is coming. Forestry is sending in its budget appropriation any day now, if they haven't already, for next year. And this is a place where the people of Trinidad and Tobago, without sticking their neck out to report a poacher and worry about getting in trouble for that, can have a voice and need to have a voice. And I'm going to challenge everyone in reach of my voice right now in this country to do something. Write a letter, make a phone call to your MP and say, look, because it's easy to beat up on forestry or EMA or WASA or whoever or fisheries because they're not performing to the extent that you'd like them to. They're easy targets. And they don't always perform as well as they should. That's a given. But at the same time, they're ridiculously underfunded and undersupported. So, this is an opportunity for us to go ahead and be constructively critical where it's appropriate, but also to team up with forestry and team up with EMA to say, Mr. Minister, Mr. Member of Parliament, Miss Senator, we want you to put up, to get it done. Because there's plenty of money in this budget, and tiny fractions of the budgets would have an enormous impact on the environmental community and environmental management in this country. So if you're out there, that's my challenge for you today, is write a letter, make a phone call. When you bump into your member of parliament in the grocery, tell them, hey, I expect you to take this on now in this budget.
If I may, and especially to take off the point that was being made by our colleague from Eco Warriors, yes, granted that the existing framework provides a fair amount of frustration to people such as himself and the group he represents to really come on board and make the sort of impact that they would like to make. Let me just say, though, that over recent years, the Forestry Division has been re-examining the ways in which it operates. And we are moving in the direction of incorporating, facilitating these various interests of civil society. All right? It's a international phenomenon. It's all over the world. You cannot manage this with a centralized authority acting all by itself. We need the support.